Hello everybody, welcome back to Spilled Theory. I'm Jeff, and this is a podcast where I take apart Built to Spill songs and learn about how they work and share a little bit of what I found, and hope that it makes all of us better songwriters and better musicians, better music analysts, if that's the sort of thing that you're into. In this episode, we'll be talking about Carry the Zero. It's a very popular song, probably one of Built to Spill's best known and most requested songs, and I'm really excited to talk about it today. Before we dive right into it, I wanted to give a shout out to all the people listening. Somehow I had not watched the count that we're at like 325 plays, which is a pretty nice solid number. I had missed the 100 mark. We're kind of spread out over a bunch of different places, but most of you guys are listening on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and you can also find it any other place. I wanted to say hello to most of the people in the US listening. I hope you're doing well, staying warm, looking forward to spring, and our nice friends in Canada. We also have people listening in France, Sweden, the UK, and Mexico. Let me know if you're listening in a different country. That'd be cool to hear where people are tuning in from. So diving right into Carry the Zero, this song is in E major, and one of the fundamental lessons we'll get out of the way is a lesson about seventh chords. Now, seventh chords are a little bit more advanced. Whenever you're talking about them, you're kind of already assuming that you understand the basic triads, which is the 1, the 3, and the 5 of a scale. And so with seventh chords, these are an extension of a triad, and so you're playing the 1, the 3, the 5, and the 7, and you're skipping each of those even notes. As a result, seventh chords add a little bit more tension, they sound a little bit richer. For me, they have sort of a bittersweet quality that's really classic, and it recalls like the American songbook, maybe Broadway music, maybe jazz, all that kind of stuff. So if you haven't noticed, seventh chords are some of my favorite because of the extra richness they add, but they can be a little bit confusing to talk about. In Carry the Zero, we start with an A major 7 chord, and then there's also a B7 chord. And the two kinds of seventh chords you can have are the major 7th or the dominant 7th. And we can talk a little bit about how those are written in symbols and the difference between them. The major 7th, the 7th note comes exactly from the major scale, so that makes sense. When we're talking about a C major 7th chord, the notes are C, E, G, and B natural. And for me, the major 7th chord has a really bittersweet, kind of dreamy quality to it. It sounds a little bit unresolved. And in contrast, the dominant 7th would be C, E, G, B flat. The difference between these two is that the 7th is flattened in a dominant 7th. And the way that a dominant 7th sounds, it sounds a little bit more Broadway-like. Typically, these chords occur naturally when they're the 5th chord in a song. So that would be G, B, D, F in a C major song. The major 7th chord is typically represented by the MAJ7 chord symbol. Sometimes it's a capital M7, sometimes it's a triangle 7, and then in jazz, typically, sometimes it's a capital MA7, and these all mean the same thing. It means you won't be flattening your 7th. The best way to learn the difference is to use them to spend a lot of time with one chord kind, and then eventually you'll figure it out, and it will all be natural. Diving into the rest of the song, the chords are A major 7, E, then B dominant 7th, and then F sharp minor. And within the key of the song, these are the 4 major 7th, the 1, the 5 dominant 7th, and then the minor 2. So Doug starts the song by playing all by himself without any counting with the drummer, and he establishes a tempo. Then he goes up an octave above the 12th fret. he arpeggiates and embellishes the same chord shapes that he was playing an octave below. Meanwhile, Jim is playing pretty high on what seems to be the E string, and it's like this really gorgeous singing line that has a lot of delay, and it really adds to the atmosphere and the vibe of the song. After the first verse, we get into the solo. I've carefully tabbed out the solo from the record. You can find a link to that in the show notes. And we'll talk a little bit later on about the notes that he's using and the approach for soloing. But meanwhile, later on, Jim comes in with a almost bass line that adds depth to the song behind the solo. And I have that in the tabs as well. And moving on, we go to the next verse. It's interesting to note that this song is basically all verses. There isn't exactly a chorus, and the whole song is basically a cycle of 4 chords. There are some change-ups, especially near the end. And at the end, we are alternating between the A major 7 and the E chord, and we do that for a few lines, and then we sit on the E and build tension that way. And then it jumps to a new section where Doug is playing his signature octave ideas, and he plays a part that kind of subverts your expectation. He plays a pattern and then surprises you by not playing that pattern a third time. Meanwhile, you have a few string bends behind it. And then at the very end, you have all 3 guitar players playing this 2-note line, which sits around the 9th and 11th fret. They're all playing basically the same part, and it's really huge. I think it's fun to play this part in octaves as well, because it adds a little bit of that flavor that we hear in other areas. You can fill out the sound of the song a little bit yourself that way. And moving on, we can talk about the lyrics. I feel a little bit less sure about this one in the lyrics, because I think the way the lyrics are written are pretty impressionistic. They hint at a lot of things, they make you feel a lot of different things, but aren't completely clear about the images and the context. So we start with, I'm not knocking your want to carry that home. Took it with you when you moved and got it broke. Found the pieces, we counted them all alone. Didn't add up, forgot to carry a 0. And so I think this is pretty emotional already. You have the idea of moving and leaving home and changing homes, breaking things that you had. Kind of reminds me of maybe memories or accidents or mistakes. This person with the speaker tries to put the pieces back together, but it's kind of incomplete. There's something that's missing. We have the math metaphor of carrying a 0, which I think is pretty powerful. It can be interpreted in a few ways. There's the idea of like a mathematical mistake, but then I also think of carry a 0 as being someone who lifts or does all the work for someone who feels like they're nothing. And in the next lines we have, I can't be your apologist very long. I'm surprised that you'd want to carry that on. Count your blemishes, you can't, they're all gone. I can't see your response putting them back on. And so I think this one is also powerful. The speaker sounds like they're getting tired in being the apologist, which apologist is kind of another word for devil's advocate. It sounds like the speaker's surprised that the other person wants to keep arguing. For a long time, the way that I interpreted the line, count your blemishes, you can't, they're all gone, I thought of that as like forgiveness and kind of smoothing out a lot of mistakes and imperfections in your perceiving someone a certain way, because all their good qualities mask that. But I think there's a whole nother way of thinking about it too. I think it could be that the person sees themselves as somebody who doesn't have many mistakes or errors and that they're perfect. It could be a little bit sarcastic in saying you're right, you don't have any faults, shining a light on the fact that they do. And the next part is, like they're waiting for your guard to fall so they can see it all, and you're so occupied with what other persons are occupied with, and vice versa. I think this is about someone opening up and being honest with other people about who they are, seeing all of their faults and insecurities. This person is really worried about other people and what they think about them, accomplishments and that sort of thing. The next lines are, and you've become what you thought was dumb, a fraction of the sum. Yeah, you have become a fraction of the sum, the middle and the front. I've interpreted this as pointing out hypocrisy, that somebody has changed or evolved over time into becoming the thing that they didn't like or hated even before, that people change over time and become the thing that they used to hate. And then the next lines closing up the song are, and now it's coming back, hasn't it come too far? I was trying to help, but I guess I pushed too hard. Now we can't even touch it, afraid it'll fall apart. And so I think this one definitely strikes me as sort of talking about a relationship and looking at the past and seeing how long these people have been together and what they've been through, how they've progressed. And the person was trying to help someone with all of their weaknesses and their faults and the things that they're trying to deal with, but it might have backfired or didn't work out right. And then at the end, things sound pretty fragile. It recalls the image before of breaking something when you moved, and that possibly this relationship is so weak and fragile that you're afraid to really do anything because it's right on the verge of falling apart. And again, that kind of ties in the name too. Built to Spill sounds like something that was made with mistakes or faults, and it's right on the verge of falling apart. In the solo, Doug is playing mostly notes from the E major scale, but it can definitely also be interpreted as fitting within playing from the Phrygian mode. Now, modes are a little bit of a difficult thing to wrap your head around and explain. Basic idea of what the Phrygian mode is you are playing starting on the third note of a scale and playing in the key of the first note. And so, for example, in this case, we are playing centering around the G sharp in the scale, but we're playing in the E major scale. And for every note, there's a mode based on that. How I tend to approach soloing now, you can sort of simplify it and you can use as much theory as you want to. But the key is to find the notes that work and avoid the ones that don't. And once you find those notes, play around with them, focus on your phrasing, find something that feels and sounds good. And it's important to keep that emotion, because without the emotion, you're just shredding, you're just noodling. And then it's also important to focus on the phrasing, because that's how people structure their sentences. That's how we express more. One key difference in phrasing, a lot of musicians might talk about playing like a horn player, and what they mean by that is kind of playing like how a singer would, because horns and singers run out of air at the end of a breath. And so you start your phrase kind of strong and maybe slow, and then you speed it up a little bit and then like kind of trail off. And then you take a breath and then you start another one. I kind of started playing music on trombone, and so something that I can relate to. And when I'm playing, I take a big breath and I kind of exhale as I'm playing. And so I think that can probably help you too if you're trying to play a little bit more lyrically, a little bit more natural phrasing, just to breathe out a little bit as you're playing, and then take a big deep breath and then start playing again. And kind of connect those two and make it feel like when you're breathing out, you're also playing notes and the music is coming out that way. And we talked in the first episode about the way that Doug's phrasing shows itself in his solos and the lessons that we could learn from the way he plays kind of scalar lines, and then he'll surprise people by switching up rhythms or throwing a different idea into the system. Another lesson to learn from him and other great soloists are the way they structure their solos. In Carry the Zero, and as we saw previously, he'll start out slow, and it's an introduction to the solo, and it's a foundation and a starting point. And then after that point, he builds and draws tension, and he might get a little bit busier as it goes on. So the next time that you're soloing, or the next time you're listening to a great solo, think about the way that it starts and the way it builds up, and the way that you could do that whenever you're soloing. So that pretty much wraps up the episode. I wanted to give a quick shout out to some of the communities that are available to Built to Spill fans. I'm active and often read posts on the Facebook page Built to Spillin'. There's a lot of great content there. The subreddit Built to Spill on Reddit is a great place for similar content. And so finally, I want to end with sharing a song of a group that sounds a little bit like Built to Spill. This band is led by Mac McCon. You may recognize him from Superchunk. He has a band called Portastatic, which is a little bit like their Built to Spill counterpart. He has led Merge Records, the great North Carolina record label, and has been a leader and powerhouse in the indie music community. This has been Spilled Theory. Thanks.